Well, hi everybody. This is Donna Reed, the Agilista PM. I'm excited to be helping sponsor this webinar with Dean Leffingwell and Jennifer Fawcett. It's great to have you guys. Thanks for coming. This webinar, it looks a lot like maybe a release planning topic that you've heard in the past, but you're going to hear it from a scaled Agile point of view. So for hundreds of teams, hundreds of people, I'll let Dean and Jennifer give you all the details. But it's great to have you here. You guys know who I am, the Agilista PM. I really believe that we need to help you guys become as agile as possible, and so that's why I'm working with the scaled team. So let me give you a little logistics and we'll jump right in. Yes, we are recording this webinar for you guys, and we're going to be answering all your questions at the very end. Feel free to type them in. We'll have a Q&A session at the very end. But thank you guys for coming, and I'm going to turn it over and welcome Dean Leffingwell. He's going to kick off our webinar. So hi, Dean.
Hi, Donna. Thanks for introducing me. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes this morning. I was asked to present the front end of the release planning webinar. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been involved in probably hundreds of those sessions over time, but they also told me to get on the webinar and then get off. So my job is to kind of quickly get you oriented in the context of SAFE and then move forward from there. So you see my bio here. Well, let's just go back one if you don't mind quickly. My bio here, I've been in a position of being responsible for software development throughout my career, and I take that responsibility seriously. Perhaps in large part because I started off in the medical equipment business, or at least I got there very quickly. So our software, if we did it wrong, could kill or hurt people. And so consequently, from a very early age, I was very, very concerned about software quality. So that's been my focus throughout my career. Quality is king. And the nice thing about Agile development is that you double down on quality, because as we scale and try to go fast, you can't run fast through a swamp of old code, and you can't scale crappy code. So I'm very, very pleased that Agile is our most disciplined method that we have to focus on code quality. I am compelled to write from time to time, and my most recent book is Agile Software Requirements. It's 2011 vintage. It's pretty current. So there's lots more data in there. Things like, I think I did my best job of really focusing on describing, for example, user stories, how they work and how you structure them and what value they provide. So that's just an example of a full chapter in that book that only is a short abstract on the site. So that's me. Let's move forward to what we've been doing lately. A year or so ago, a number of folks approached me, people on this call, and said, Dean, we like your work, we like what you're doing in these enterprises, but we think we could do better than just a book. We like the way you've evolved the blog and the PowerPoint design, but we think you could do a lot more, and we could make it a lot more public. And by the way, that PowerPoint design is looking kind of old and clunky. So what if we give this thing a facelift and published it and really got deadly serious about putting the best possible content in the public forum? And that's what we've done. It's been very well received, I think, for a couple reasons. We believe in our customers that have adopted the framework achieved really, really great results. We actually elevated just recently case studies to a first-class citizen on the menu. So if you want to go look at right now, there's 9 published case studies, including one out from Telstra, Australia's largest provider of telephony and mobile devices. That's just pushed today. I actually haven't announced it yet. The results that people get when they apply the framework and Agile. It's not just applying the framework. The framework's built around Agile. So we don't give the framework all the credit for people being Agile. We have to give the Agile, the Agile universe and all those methodologies that brought us here a large credit for that. But we add to that, and we provide a framework around it. We provide roles and activities and artifacts like vision and roadmap, things you need if you're working with large numbers of teams. And we have treatments, for example, at the portfolio level, which is important to understand where the big initiatives come from. The core values of the framework, the things that we care about, are alignment. That's basically alignment trumps local optimization every time. I've already talked about code quality. We're not backing off on that. We're going to double down in version 2.5 of the framework. We're going much deeper on code quality. Mostly that's in presentation mode initially, but what you'll see over the next year or so is substantive new content in the area of things like collective ownership and what we call pair work and continuous integration, things we assume in Agile that don't necessarily happen all the time. Program execution is a core value. I would have to say that that's where we start. We think this is the most important thing at the enterprise level is to execute large programs well. And item number 4 here, transparency, that's our proxy for trust. Lean and Agile development in general require complete trust in the system. We have to trust ourselves to see bad news and realize that it's good to have bad news, because the bad news is coming anyway. The only difference is whether you know it or not. A framework can't build trust, because trust is a personal relationship amongst individuals. It's not a practice. It's not a protocol. But we can provide transparency, and therefore we continue to both implement and coach in such a way that everybody knows what everybody else is up to. Politics can't stand the light of transparency. So if you want to focus on results, transparency is a pretty big deal. Here's the big picture. Sorry, go back please to the big picture. Just one. There's the big picture. This is version 2.1. If you go to scaledagileparameter.com/BP25, that's /BP25, you will find version 2.5 in the development sandbox. But that development sandbox is fully linked to all the articles in 2.1. So you can actually run from 2.5 if you like, and you can start to experience the new roles. Roles, for example, business owners are included there. The descriptions for a team objectives versus program PSI objectives. The value stream appears there. So we're in the midst of a really big, for us, launch of 2.5 and the courseware that goes with us. So we're basically really scrambling. We have an arbitrarily self-imposed deadline of August 1st, time for August 2013, just because even lots of little incremental stuff has to be occasionally aggregated into big piles of newsworthy value. So that's where we're headed next. The framework has 3 levels, and they've been labeled, and it just gives you a way to reason about activities at various levels. The team level of the framework is where the code gets written. So let's have no ambiguity about that. Product managers don't write code, and release train engineers don't write code, and architects don't have to write code. So consequently, the code happens at the team level. And there we just do a few pretty critical things. We align the teams to common sprint patterns. We provide opportunities for what we call the HIP sprint, which stands for hardening, innovation, and planning. And if you follow that pattern, that means that every so often, at your discretion, you'll have a 2-week sprint to maybe do a hackathon of 2 or 4 days. Stick your planning in there for a couple of days. And realistically, in the larger enterprise, after a few sprints, if you're getting ready for a larger release, it's time to clean up some technical debt and to do some things that you can't do every single sprint, like load and performance testing and user acceptance testing. So hardening is part of it if you need it, but it's optional. We only recommend the things that make sense. We had what I just heard described the other day as a smidgen of governance. So at this level, we start to see program vision, system architecture, and user experience guidance, so that the teams are operating from a common viewpoint, so they're aligned to a common vision and mission. Thanks. And the program level, that's really the heart of the framework. I think a few years back we were in the process of saying, well, it's not really just a matter of getting a few teams to work together. That doesn't bring in our business owners. That's not the whole value stream. That doesn't worry about deployment and the security architect and what it takes to make a system work. And what the program level really does is address a historically nasty problem, which is the team's sprint. Everybody gets that. But the question is the system they're building sprinting too? Or is it maybe just wandering off through time somewhat incrementally with deferred risk to system integration? And if you look around yourself right now kind of logically and look into development shops, ask yourself the question, those teams are sprinting, that's a good thing. But is the thing they're building sprinting? And if not, then you really need to think about the framework, because the framework is going to bring basically sprint level quality to the program. And these large programs are going to have deliverables every 2 weeks, just like our teams do, and that's going to be demonstrable by the system demo. And then lastly, at some periodic periods of time, it's this PSI boundary, we're going to, at worst case, sit down for a routine planning session and do some innovation, do a bit of planning work for next week, and commit to the next PSI. So SAFE is commitment-based in the sense that teams and programs do commit to the very short term. And what you find is that that's actually practical, and it also kind of dampens the enthusiasm for really long-term commitments, because A, they're no good anyway, and B, once you figure out what it takes to commit to short-term, you start to recognize that, wow, without planning all that, how could we possibly know? And we can't plan for what we don't understand. So that's the program level, and encourage you to go there. Also encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, which will be described to you very soon. There is a prior version of this webinar, basically a walk through the framework from my perspective recorded, and in 45 minutes or so you can get a pretty much deeper view. And last level, if you will, is the portfolio level. And there we have to stay lean. I mean, lean applies there more than, quote, Agile does, because lean thinking brings us the ideas of making sure that our demand is limited to match our capability, or that we scale up capability to match demand, because when there's a misfit, productivity goes down. If I try to manage, or build, more cars in a factory than the factory can support, and I shove additional work in process out there, I don't build more cars, I build less. Well, you can't see our stuff, but the same thing is true. If you want to, if you shove more stuff onto the software development shop floor than they can do, your productivity and your throughput will go down, not up. And therefore we have to understand that at the portfolio level. And therefore, lean thinking, which you can find in depth throughout the framework, starts to make you think about work in process and work in process limits and visualizing workflow and understanding demand and understanding throughput. This is absolutely critical at the portfolio level, because those are the major economic drivers for the enterprise. And with that, at every PSI boundary, stands for potentially shippable increment, it's really just a planning cadence. I've never been happy with the words that we picked for that, but that's what we've got. At every single boundary, 8 to 10 weeks, we like to see the entire program get together and plan face-to-face. And a recent blog, or not a blog post, I just cleaned up the release planning article a little bit, and I made a note there. If you can't do face-to-face release planning, even if it's what we call face-to-face to face-to-face, where the teams are planning concurrently but from separate locations, you're really not doing SAFe, and you won't get the full benefits of SAFe. But we're going to turn that over to Jennifer, because she has a lot of experience in this area, and she's going to run the rest of the webinar from here.
Thank you so much, Dean. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
So from here, I think I'd like to dive into what exactly is a PSI or release. We use the term PSI and release in the same context. So PSI is a potentially shippable increment, and it actually is, in the enterprise world, what we call a release. So in SAFe, teams build software. Every team builds software incrementally, resulting in value at the worst every 2 weeks. Ultimately every day is the goal. However, in the enterprise, enterprises typically release less frequently. So in all cases, the PSI release is the development time box, or in other words, kind of the Uber sprint, that uses cadence and synchronization to facilitate planning for what we call a newsworthy event. So at the end, we're delivering fully tested system-level solutions every 8 to 12 weeks. And perhaps the simplest way to describe it is by using the term Uber sprint, that has kind of three values per se, and one of them is the fact that we deliver routine and continuous planning cycle that the entire company can plan on, that individuals can plan their lives around, we can plan our vacations around, that we can plan to be there for. It's an aggregation of the iterations value that the teams are sprinting on that can create that newsworthy event. And it also fosters road mapping and implementation and measuring through our predictable time box. So let's talk about the release planning meeting context. So the release planning meeting in SAFe is the program level planning session. It is the planning session for the program. And we look at it in 3 different ways. So first, the Agile release train is the self-organized, self-managing Agile program itself that actually delivers a value stream to the enterprise. So it's fueled by the teams, and the teams are synchronized in a standard fixed-length sprint designed for delivery flow, for product development flow. And the release planning meeting is this planned event that all members of an Agile release train show up for, that actually results in the committed set of program objectives, which we'll dive into. So everybody shows up. All the roles show up, and we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation here. And to actually deliver the release planning meeting, Scaled Agile has what we call an Agile release train quick start. And that's a 5-day program that provides the training for everybody on the team. So one of the challenges we have is, how do we get 100 people in a room aligned to the same common terminology, to the same cadence, to be synchronized on a predictable cadence? So the Agile Release Train Quick Start is just that. It's the 5-day program that provides the training for all the team members on a program. Starts with 2 days of Scrum XP, so it gets everybody aligned on the common terminology and what SAFe is, and Scrum XP. And then we dive into 2 days of release planning, and we'll talk about the different ceremonies that we use in release planning. So the release planning meeting is actually the pacemaker. This is what we do every 8 to 12 weeks. Everybody attends in person if possible. I've done this dozens of times with large enterprises, and the first time large enterprises do it, they typically say, oh, we don't need to fly people in from London. We don't need to fly people in from the UK or China or India. And then in the retrospect, it always comes up, hey, it would have been great if so-and-so was here doing this face-to-face with us. So if at best, take that advice, fly them in for the first one, create those relationships, have that face-to-face meeting, create the BA. You'll increase your speed to market a lot faster by having the face-to-face, which Dean talked about. So everybody attends. Product management owns the features and the priorities, and then the development team owns the story planning and the high-level estimates. Here's where we start to decentralize control and allow decision-making at the levels of the framework, which really makes sense to experience product development flow. So architects and UX folks are there. They need to be floating the room. They need to be answering the questions, providing the governance, the interfaces, and the dependencies, because we know that architecture is a first-class citizen in SAFe. And the result of the release planning meeting is this committed set of program objectives for the next release. So obviously there needs to be some planning before release planning. So as the teams are sprinting, as the teams are working on the current PSI, the program level and the portfolio level are actually working on the next PSI, so in preparation for the next release planning meeting. So in that preparation, leadership is creating a series of briefings to set the context. We're doing kind of pre-planning, if you will, creating the executive briefing, which is the communication from hopefully the highest level of executive that can attend the release planning meeting. They're preparing the product vision briefings, which is the vision for the overall value stream, the overall program, and a list of the top 10 features. And we'll talk a little bit about why 10 is probably a good number for features to present. They're planning the architectural vision and roadmap, which is the vision for architecture, because obviously we need to know the vision for the architecture so we can start to create that runway and start to create the framework for architecture going forward. Architectural stories are actually epics, typically epics. They typically span more than one PSI, so we need to plan that so we can communicate that and also communicate any common frameworks that the teams can leverage within their software development lifecycle. And then provide development context if there's any changes to new standard practices, any new tools or techniques that you might be using perhaps for continuous integration or for acceptance testing. So before release planning, we need to have a cadence. We need to communicate to the team how often we're releasing PSIs, what the program planning calendar is for the next year. So again, this allows people to kind of plan their lives around these big ceremonies that they're probably going to want to participate in, because everybody kind of wants to know what's coming next. It's intuitive for developers to kind of know what's coming next so that they can make the best decisions about how to build their software. So the program level calendar includes the release planning meetings themselves, the 2-day event where we all get together, the PSI demos, when we're having those, and when we're having the inspect and adapt workshops. That's a program level calendar. We also plan out the team level calendar as well, which has when are we all doing sprint planning meetings. We do that on a cadence as well, when we're doing the sprint demos and when we're doing the sprint retrospectives. next slide is what I like to affectionately call kind of the sausage-making diagram. This is kind of the inputs and the outputs to the release planning process. So in summary, the inputs are the business and the business and technology vision. You know, the milestones and the top 10 features that we're striving for. And then the output of the release planning process is the actual release objectives, the PSI objectives, and the program board, which I'll talk about, which has kind of a big picture view. We call it an information radiator on what the different teams are working on as far as the features are concerned, but what the inputs to those features are, because obviously we'll have cross-team dependencies throughout the way. So let's dive a little bit into the tactics and the actual ceremonies of release planning. So here's a sample agenda for day one. You'll see we time box everything, and we time box everything because if we don't, we'll tend to wind up with a PSI that's probably out of scope. So if we time box everything, we can more predictably come out with a release that's time boxed as well that we can actually commit to. So we kick it off with the business context, and we'd love to have the highest of high C-level person in the room. You know, when we're dealing with large-scale enterprises, most people don't even, you know, get to meet the CEO or the highest level C person, and this is a great opportunity to fly that person in and have a face-to-face with, you know, the highest level visionary of the organization. So there's no real prescribed format for what the C-level person will present, but some good ideas would be, you know, the portfolio investment themes. So what are we investing our money in as far as investment themes are concerned? So we can start with the highest level alignment there as well. And then it's great to communicate the organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, what we call the SWOT analysis, so we can see what we're up against. This will allow the teams to really understand who our competitors are, and it'll perhaps allow them to make better decisions when they're actually executing and building their software. So that typically takes an hour with some Q&A as well, gives the teams a chance to actually have that conversation, have that face-to-face. And then product gets up and starts talking about the actual solution vision of the value stream that they're launching. So product management presents the content vision and the highest priority features. And we cap that at 10 features, hoping we can at least get to the top 10. In many organizations, when I've been launching these release trains, sometimes these features are so big, we get to the top 3. So don't be surprised if you only get to the top 3, but there's no harm in bringing 10 to the table because your teams will tell you whether they can actually deliver that or not. And the release planning session will allow you to have those conversations, manage scope, and deliver the highest possible value that the teams can deliver. After product management talks about the vision and the features, architecture comes up, and the development team comes up to talk about their vision and best practices. As discussed in SAFE, architecture is a first-class citizen. It gets funding. It gets the capacity allocation in every single team that's touching the architecture and the platform, so that they're not afterthoughts. So the system architect gets up and presents the vision for the architecture. Any new architectural epics, which will cross PSIs, kind of have a longer lifespan than a feature, and present any common frameworks. And then development management may provide any changes to their best practices, any new tools that they may be using for build and test automation. And really, this is also very important, defines the definition of done. What does it mean to actually complete and be successful in delivering this PSI? And then finally, before the teams can get going, we need to provide some planning context. So the facilitator, typically the RTE, the release train engineer, or somebody from the PMO office will set the shared understanding of the planning process and what the teams actually need to deliver at the end of this 2-day process. So they'll go through the team planning process. They'll go through acceptance criteria and how we plan acceptance criteria. and we'll talk about the program board and how they interact with the program board and put their features up and map them to their inputs or dependencies. And then as far as each team, they each have the same set of deliverables. At the end of release planning, they'll have an objective sheet, which is a high-level description of what their objectives are, which typically might even map directly into features. They may not. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then they have one sheet per sprint for their stories. In release planning, it's not necessarily expected that they break down their stories into tasks. Of course, they'll do that at the sprint level when they move into their sprints. But they do need to at least kind of break them down into stories and have those high-level estimates so they can size them and fit them into their sprints. And then one risk sheet for all their risks and dependencies and impediments so that we can raise them to the program level and address them. So now we're ready for team breakout number 1. So in the breakouts, the teams break down their stories break down their features into stories. So they take the features that the product managers have presented and they break them down into stories, and then they start estimating them and placing them into sprints. At this point, there's a lot of back and forth that's going on in between the teams. A lot of working through dependencies. You might have a UX team that's working on a new feature for the website that's completely dependent on another team that's building the services. So those product owners will be going back and forth and making sure that the team that's doing the services is well aware of the UX deliverable so that they commit to delivering the services in time for the UX team to actually deliver that. So that said, it's best if we have release planning in one room. So yes, it'll get loud. Yes, it'll get crazy. Yes, there's a lot of people in the room. But in order to move through the release planning process in 2 days, it's really best to have everybody in one room. And it's actually a lot of fun to have everybody in one room as well. So we break out the stories in our backlog using stickies, using our colored stickies. And this is a great way to visualize our capacity allocation for each team. It's a great way of communicating reality versus the ask. We all know that product management comes into the room asking for features. That's what they do. They don't like to hear that we have technical debt. But we know we have technical debt. We know we have defects that we need to resolve. And by putting them up there on the board, it gives a great visualization for the product managers and the business owners to see, wow, okay, I might be willing to remove this feature in lieu of gaining some quality here or doing some refactoring so I can scale there. It's just a great way of communicating reality versus the ask. So moving into the BVIR, the big dependency board, here we have the sprints mapped out for our PSI. Typically, we'll have 5 sprints, the last one being the HIP sprint that Dean talked about. And here's where we'll map our top 10 features, or maybe it's 3, maybe it's 10. We map our top 10 features in blue to the feature inputs, which are in yellow, so we can actually visualize the dependencies, and we can manage the dependencies along the way. So one of the teams I actually worked with when we were launching their first release train, and we thought we had this thing all planned. We thought we had architected our teams in a way that we can actually deliver features at the end. We architected the entire PSI, the entire release train, so that we could deliver features at the end. But when at the end we actually mapped out everything, we saw, wow, we have so many dependencies on external resources. We better rethink how we want to organize this train and organize the teams in a way that they can continuously deliver value, they can continuously deliver features along the way. So, team breakout number 1. One of the goals for the breakout number 1 is to deliver the first draft of the objectives. And the objectives are really just brief summaries in business terms of what each team intends to deliver. So why do we talk about objectives in business terms? Well, the business folks don't always understand what a story is. They don't always talk that language. So we develop objectives in business terms so everybody from the portfolio level down can actually understand what we're delivering. And we can turn those into maybe marketing terms so that the marketing team can get going on what the team has committed to deliver at the end of this PSI as well. So they often map, objectives often map back into the features that are in the backlog, but sometimes they don't. So sometimes they could be, deliver this new module in the portal, which is an aggregation of a set of features that we can communicate to the company. Or it could be a milestone, like, hey, we're going to this big event and we need to deliver a trade show demo. Or it could be a PSI objective. It could be we're moving on an architectural epic so that we can continually work the architectural runway for the end game at the end of the year. Or it could be a major refactoring. So this team breakout number 1, building your PSI draft objectives, is actually grooming for the next breakout session number 2, where the business owners circulate the room, they review the objectives, and they actually rank them by putting a business value on them. So that at the end of day 2, the teams will be committing to this set of objectives rather than the actual stories that they're breaking down based on the features. Also in the Team Breakout 101, Scrum of Scrums happens. It happens on a regular cadence. It's usually 2 or 3 times a day. This is a great opportunity for the Scrum Masters to get together and kind of have this planning checkpoint. Keeps the teams on track. Are there any other dependencies we need to be working on? Hey, what came up within the last hour? Do your teams really understand what they're working on? Do they have the resources they need? So this is a great opportunity to help drive out the risks, and the Scrum Masters will actually do this real time, working with the business owners in the business to help real time work out the impediments and the dependencies. And we do this through simple planning radiators. We've got a big sticky on the wall. You can see a couple examples of this. One, you can have a big spreadsheet that's either projected on the wall, or you can actually have a big sticky on the wall where the Scrum Masters can come up and make sure that they have everything in check. And then at the end of day 1, we end with a draft plan review. So this is kind of the engine that kind of fuels the program conversation. We'll review kind of the velocity and capacity and load of the teams. Obviously, it's up to the teams to load their sprints, but we want to make sure that they're not loading 100%. It's kind of like loading the highway to 100%. We don't want to load the highway to 100% because we know it's going to slow down. So we manage that work in progress by making sure we're only loading to maybe 75 or 80%. Gives us an overview of kind of the planned flow and making sure that we're managing the dependencies from the big dependency board. And it gives us a draft of the PSI objectives to make sure that we're in alignment with the overall ask. And then finally, it provides the program risks, impediments, and program board dependencies, and allows for the business owners to have a Q&A at the end of the day. So that is the team's end of the day. We time box it to 5 o'clock. We let them go. We let them have a good night's sleep. We let them go home and have their bubble bath or their glass of wine so they can decompress. But the managers and the business owners actually stay at the end of day 1. And they take the risks and the dependencies, and they look at the load, and they do kind of their own retrospect on the day. What did we learn? Where do we need to adjust? Are we feeling like the team's gaining confidence? Do we feel like the team understands the scope? Do we feel like we've provided them with the resources they need to get the ask done? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are we seeing teams struggle? Typically we'll see some frustration in the room, and it's another great benefit of having everybody in the room. There's nothing better than being able to see body language of people. If we didn't have everybody in the same room, there's no way that we can see the frustration in somebody's face or the shoulders up by the ears, or the frowns on the face. So that's a great indicator of the success of our project, is being able to actually look at these people in the eye and get a feel for how they understand and how they actually grok the ask of the features. So typically we'll be in a room with a lot of food, maybe some beer and wine, and we'll have an honest conversation of what projects or features can we sacrifice? How can we reassure the team that we're here, we're working in cahoots with them to make sure that we can deliver value at the end of the PSI. So the outcome of this meeting, and sometimes this meeting will go till 1 o'clock in the morning, is what decisions do we have to make between now and 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to address these issues. So we'll come out with any adjustments that we need to make. So here we go. Release planning day 2. We open up our time boxes and our ceremonies at 8 o'clock in the morning with the outcome of the meeting from the night before. What adjustments are we making? Are we adding more resources? Are we shuffling resources? Are we removing features? Those type of things. And we'll spend an hour making sure that we're realigning the teams on those decisions that were made from the previous night. And then we'll move into the team breakouts again, so move into team breakout 2. So based on the new knowledge and a good night's sleep, which is really important, because I don't know if you have the same experience as everybody else, but typically when you sleep on something, you have a great aha the next morning on new ideas or new innovation that can be implemented within the release. So we kick off team breakout number 2. At this point, the business owners are still circulating the room. They're reviewing the objectives, and they're starting to assign business value to the PSI objectives. And business value is pretty much just a number from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, on what they see is actually delivering the highest value to the organization. And this is a great radiator for the room to see, because if you have a business owner that's circulating the room that's giving everything a 10, well, we know that that business owner really didn't prioritize and really isn't thinking about the priority, because we can't have everything as a 10. We just can't have that. So it's a great visual radiator to make any adjustments there as well. Have those open and honest conversations. The teams finalize on the PSI plan, and they also consolidate the program risks, impediments, and dependencies. And here's where we talk about our stretch objectives as well. The objectives really is kind of centralizing the alignment of the organization. So when we're talking about decentralizing control and centralizing control, obviously we want to centralize control of the strategy, because it's the highest level of decision making within the organization. So we're going to centralize the control of strategy, which typically happens at the program and portfolio level. But we want to decentralize control of the execution. We want to work with the teams on the ask, but we don't want to dictate how they're going to execute, how they're actually going to build the software that we're asking for. So that said, we all know that we can't control the future. We can only control the future kind of in small incremental time boxes. So things change. So we manage to change through providing stretch objectives to kind of provide that guard band. What if something happens and a third-party vendor can't deliver what they promised to deliver within the PSI? Well, do we stop the teams? Absolutely not. The teams move on to the next thing, and that could be the stretch objectives. So stretch objectives have business value as well, so that the teams can make the decisions on which one they choose to work on next. So by doing this, this kind of maintains the central control of the strategy, and it allows the teams to make the decision making at the level that they're really good at. Then we have the final plan review. We make any changes to velocity and load. We have our final PSI objectives with the business value. we review our program risks, impediments, and we take a look at the program feature board. And we make any changes at this point as well. And we build the final plan. And this is really fun. So all of the objectives are produced on a big 3M sticky note. And we do that for a reason. I've had teams that have tried to put it in an Excel document, and they've come up with 45 objectives that they think they're going to deliver within the PSI. That's pretty unrealistic. We put it on a sticky note because if it fits on a sticky note, the chances of it being real and being something that we can actually execute on are pretty good. So the teams individually bring up their sticky notes. They present them to the business owners. They give the business owners a chance to ask the questions, and they actually ask the business owner, look them into the eye and say, do you accept our plan? And if they accept their plan, they can continue and kind of wrap up. If not, the teams stay and they continue working on their objectives until they come up with an acceptable plan with the business owners. There's also the program risks that have been collected along the way. We go through a little ceremony where we roam the risks. We either resolve them, we own them, we make sure somebody has responsibility for them. We accept them like, yep, that's there. There's really nothing I can do about it, but we're still going to carry on. Or we mitigate them and we adjust the plan as accordingly. At the end, we move into the PSI confidence vote, which actually is the commitment. So after we go through and resolve all the dependencies and risks, we take a confidence vote. And we do this at two different levels. We do this first at the team level, where we go around the room and we do a fist of five at the team level. Fist of five is basically, using our hands to communicate. One finger means there's really little confidence that this is going to happen. Two is, little confidence, but maybe there's a little probability. Three is I have good confidence, but we should really still talk about it. And what we're shooting for is fours or fives, high confidence or very high confidence that we can meet the objectives for this particular PSI. So we do that at the team level, and then we do that at the entire program level as well. So we go around, we do the teams, and then we ask everybody in the room, 100 people in the room. We've got our AV going, we've got India, we've got London, we've got Toronto, and we have everybody putting their fist or fives up there. If we have some twos and ones, we should talk about it. We should reduce scope. We should remove some features so that we increase the confidence. So the worst thing we can do is think we're leaving release planning without a high level of confidence that we can actually deliver. So the commitment is actually two parts. One is the team's confidence in hitting the objectives. So the teams agree to do everything in their power to meet the agreed upon objectives, but in the event that they can't, the teams agree to escalate immediately to their Scrum Master so that any corrective action can be taken. So sometimes it happens. Sometimes you get the ones and the twos. And if there's low confidence, we rework the plan so that we can come up with the highest level confidence. At the end, we do a meeting planning retrospective. This is a best practice not only in SAFe but in Scrum. So the release plan is going to evolve over time. So ending it with the retrospective will help us with our Kaizen. It'll help us continually improve. I think we all know how to do this. What went well, what didn't go well, and what can we do better next time. And we take an action item, we take their action items into our program backlog, and we take action during the PSI. So moving forward, the release planning session ends with going forward. So we've got our tooling support. We either have the tools we need to support our stories, and we've got some great partners out there like Rally and version 1 that have the tooling support to support that. We've got our BVIRs, our big visual information radiators that map to the dependencies. And then we have the cadence that we've planned for in the beginning of the PSI We've got when are we doing our Scrum of Scrums, when are we doing our release management meetings, and then the other ceremonies that we need to provide for continuous flow throughout our PSI. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with some resources. Tons of resources out there. Obviously, the Scaled Agile Framework, open source. Visit it at scaledagileparamework.com. Buy the book, Agile Software Requirements. It is kind of the foundation of the framework. Goes into a little deeper dive. You can get training and certification and courseware from scaledagileacademy.com. We can help you with your implementation strategy at scaledagile.com. You can learn how to launch your own Agile release trains at scaledagile.com, launch Agile release trains. Go to our partner sites and see what our partners are doing as well. And first and foremost, join the community. Go to community at community.scaledagile.com and join the newsletter. You can join the LinkedIn community of practice, the Scaled Agile Framework community of practice. You can go to the YouTube channel and download this presentation once we get it up there here in a few hours. And you can also go to SlideShare and download this particular webinar as well. And visit us at Agile 13. We're really busy in getting ready for 2.5. As Dee mentioned, we'll be in our partners' booths. It'll be myself and Drew Gemolo and Dean will be roving Agile 2013. We'd love to see you out there. We'll probably have a pretty visible T-shirt where you'll be able to recognize us. It'll have a big picture on the back. You won't be able to miss us. So come visit us at Agile 2013. And let's see if I stayed in my time box. I think I pretty much did. I left about 12 minutes for questions. So Donna, what do you have?
Good job, Jennifer. Yeah, we got a lot of questions here. I'm going to just jump right in. One of the first questions, if we go via the order that you talked, is how detailed should the stories expected to be before you jump into that first team breakout?
So that's a good question. So before, in planning for the PSI, while the team is working on the previous release, there's going to be a lot of previews, a lot of different briefings that the product manager and the product owners are going to come in and time box to maybe an hour a sprint or 2 hours a sprint so they can start to give the team a preview of what's coming. Obviously, you don't want to go into release planning completely blind. You want the teams to have a high-level overview of what the ask is so they can start to think about it. And the typical time box for that is within the HIP sprint, within the Hardening Innovation and Planning sprint, is a great time frame for the product managers, product owners to come in and kind of present that high level of the features so the teams can start to think about it. So they should have a pretty good understanding of what the feature ask is before they walk into the room. And then I think your question is how detailed does the stories need to be as far as breaking down during the release planning? Well, they at least need to have agreement amongst the team when they're doing their Agile estimation what the team thinks the size of that story is. They don't need to break it down real time any further than that because the next step after release planning is they're going to go into their sprint planning and they're going to plan the next 2 weeks. That's the ceremony which allows them to break the story down to actually fit into that particular sprint.
I think that's great. Here's a question that builds on that. When you do the initial sharing up front of what you want, do you ever include some of the user experience perspective? And the second part of that question is, could there be one or more of the architecture, technology, or behavior types of slides happening? How do you deal with that sharing up front?
Oh,
what does it look like?
Absolutely. So UX, UI is part of the team. They're kind of part of the program team, but you don't necessarily have a UX person dedicated to a team, but they kind of need to float just like the architects and the product managers do around the room. And a great opportunity for UX to present their stuff is during the architecture or the development practices presentation when we kick off the meeting, is to present the overview, the wireframes, the vision, the CSS for the teams, for the UX teams that are actually building it. They need to be in the room and they need to be visible as well because they are virtual parts of the team as well.
Well, here's another question. You know, in the beginning you said we focus on the top 10. You hope you get to the top 10 features. What does that look like in presenting to the teams? Are they use cases? Are they just conversations that you have with them to align them up front? What does that look like?
Oh, that's a good question. So features are really just that. We really understand features as kind of what the benefit is to the customer. They are written in business terms, they have value, and they're written in plain English. We try not to present them we could present them in use case format, but we try not to do that at the business level because we want to communicate them in a way that everybody in the company, from marketing to the highest executives to PR, down to the development team themselves, can really understand what the ask is. So they are presented in plain English with a value that everybody can kind of understand.
That's great. And you mentioned in the team breakouts that the teams would work with one another on dependencies. Give us an idea of what that looks like.
So I think I had a great example in my talk where we were delivering a new UI. We've got new functionality and a new UI, but we've got a services team that's actually working on the services that can implement the features and functionality behind that UI. So that's a great example and a typical example of dependencies that teams might have. You might have a dependency on a third-party resource to deliver a piece of hardware. Sometimes we're not always dealing with just software. Sometimes there's hardware that we're dealing with as well, and those we know are some of the hardest dependencies that we have because typically when we're building hardware, it's a totally different process. So those are some of the dependencies that the teams will be walking around the room trying to mitigate.
Oh, okay, that's great. Here's a good one. During the team breakout, does the hourly scrum of scrums assume that the scrum master is like dedicated, or can they play a developer role as well?
So scrum master, let's see, I'm trying to read into this question. So the hourly scrum of scrums, the actual person that needs to go and meet at the hourly scrum of scrums needs to be playing the role of a scrum master. So if you have somebody on your team that's a developer that has a Scrum Master hat, yeah, that person needs to go and act as the Scrum Master and go up and have that 5-minute conversation at the Scrum of Scrums and make sure that they're managing, their team understands, they're managing the dependencies, and that they're bringing up any risks that are happening real time. I think I answered that question, but
I think you did. If not, whoever asked it, please go ahead and expound on that. That would be great. There's a couple definition questions. One is, what does spikes mean?
Okay, what does spikes mean? So spike is kind of an Agile term for, hey, I need to do some more research on this thing before I can understand how I'm going to implement it. So it's really just an opportunity to research a problem so that the engineer or the development team can get a better understanding of it. We typically time box a spike because obviously we can spiral down and spend like a week a week diving into something. We'll time box a spike to maybe 2 hours, 4 hours a day, something like that, just so we can gain a little more technical understanding on how we want to implement a specific feature.
Okay. I think that's great. That answers that question. When do you do user story grooming?
So user story grooming can happen all along the way for the next PSI. So there's kind of 2 levels of grooming. One is user story or feature grooming at the program level. So obviously the program level has their backlog of features, and that needs to have a constant set of grooming that the product manager is doing along the way, preparing for the next PSI. But user story grooming happens at the team level with product during the sprints. So you'll typically time box a grooming or a preparation session for the next sprint in the current sprint, just so you're ready for that next sprint planning. So you'll time box that to an hour or 2 every sprint.
That's good. Maybe we have time for a couple more questions. There was a really complex question that came in that was good. It seemed that you say 8 to 10 weeks you do the release planning, and there's a sense that it sounds a lot like, and you're planning so far ahead. What's really going on and why you pick 8 to 10 weeks?
I can. So typically in the enterprise, enterprises don't release every day. Large enterprises don't release every day because customers don't want to deploy brand new software every day. If you're not software as a service like some companies are and they can deliver every day, which is actually nirvana, which is actually what we're shooting for kind of in the long run, you need to plan. You need to have a plan. If you don't plan, there's no way that we can actually have a roadmap or a vision along the way. So we're actually, the PSI is actually a fractal of the actual sprint. So we're actually scaling the sprint planning to the release planning cycle so that we can actually have a roadmap, so we can execute against the vision. If we don't have a plan, then there's no way to know that when we're actually looking to the end game. So the release planning is actually an aggregate of all the features of all the sprints that we've been working on at an iterative and continuous flow basis that the company can get their arms around to perhaps have an announcement or a big release around. So it's actually kind of a culmination of a lot of different releases.
I think that's a great question. What do you do with the stories that are added in along the way?
Oh, the stories that are added in along the way. Well, if something gets added in and it's adding to capacity, then something needs to come out. And those conversations need to happen real time. And that happens. Something will come in along the way that we didn't plan for because we manage change along the way. But we work with the product managers and product owners in making sure that something comes out to accommodate for the new WIP that we're bringing in.
Great question and answer. Here's one. I'm just going to read it. Can you implement the program or Agile release chain without implementing the portfolio management section? This assumes that you have already implemented numerous Agile teams.
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically when we're looking at launching SAFe, the first place we start is to get to delivering value to the organization as quickly as we possibly can. So that's why we typically start with launching an Agile release train. It's getting value to the organization as fast as humanly possible. There's always going to be a backlog. There's always going to be stuff that we're going to want to do. So as quickly as we can groom the stuff that we want to do, get together our features, and launch an Agile release train, the sooner we're going to be able to get value to the market. Now, there's nothing wrong with launching that and then coming in and putting in the portfolio Kanban system on top of that along the way. In a previous customer that I've been in for the past 6 months, I think it took 2 release trains before we actually got the entire portfolio management infrastructure in place and have that whole kind of machine and that Kanban system working effectively.
That's great. Jennifer, you didn't mention roles like a Scrum team. You didn't talk about POs or Scrum Masters. There's some people out there probably from the PMI world that are saying, how does a traditional BA or PM or BSA role fit into this?
Yeah, so they absolutely fit into the framework. And if you take a look at the team level, you'll see that the PO typically lives on the team level. They're asking, they're answering the hundreds of questions that the team has on a day-to-day basis. They're living and sitting and eating the same pizza with the development team and the testers and the Scrum Master. The product managers and the business owners typically live at the program level, and they're constantly grooming the features for the next release. They're more external facing. They're gathering the requirements and the needs from the market. And then at the portfolio level, you have the highest level, the PPMO, the PMO folks as well, and you can dive into the framework to see all the different roles and kind of where we recommend they live within the framework.
Awesome. Well, it's 10 o'clock. Do you want to wrap things up?
Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for spending an hour with me. Finally, thank you, Donna Reed, for hosting this. I know we have a lot of your PMI friends out there, and a lot of the questions we get is how do PMPs actually submit the PDUs for this webinar and for any Scaled Agile training. So I've got a step 1, step 2 on how to do that here on the slide, and you can go ahead and log into the website and do that on your own and take credit for this webinar. So thank you so much for attending. We'll post this out there. Go to community.scaledagile.com to get the resources, and watch for our next webinar next month.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.